Hey guys. So today we're going to be talking about designing your social media graphics with Canva. But before you learn how to use Canva, you need to learn about design. So many times, flyers, graphics, posters, covers, and all that look ugly or not as visually appealing because people don't follow the design principles. I learned these design principles during an entire semester, so almost 4 months of design class when I was at Syracuse. So I wanted to pass down some of the important nuggets for you guys to keep in mind when you design. So the first thing that you want to keep in mind is the design principles are CRAP. And CRAP is an acronym for contrast, repetition, alignment, and proximity. And we're going to go through all of those today. This is a PDF that I've used in the past to teach people how to design their resumes. So the examples are resumes, but if you pull up any flyer that you like or any graphic image that you like, you will probably see this design principles represented there. So the first thing is contrast. You want things to have contrast so that they pop out. And contrast doesn't mean only color. It could be size, it could be line thickness, it could be shape, it could be space, but you want to guide people's eyes on the page and manipulate their view by making decisions of where you contrast certain things. So, for example, in this resume, you'll see that the contrast of black and white showcases what the designer wants you to focus on most, right? You'll also see it in the size. So, if you look over here under education, the years are really big. So, they want you to focus on the years. You also see that the actual role or the school is not only a larger font size than the rest of it, but it's also hot pink as well. So it immediately pops out. When you're designing, you want to think about what are the things that I can create contrast around so that one, it makes it easier on the reader to navigate the actual document. And two, what is going to draw people's attention first? What do I want people to notice first? Okay, so you'll see that over here, there isn't much contrast on the skills section. They're all pink and they're all pretty small. So your eye isn't going to naturally gravitate over there and nothing is necessarily going to pop out because it's all the same color. So think about what are the ways that you can add contrast in your designs, right? Is it switching the color scheme? Is it changing around the fonts? Right? Is it matching different kinds of fonts together? Is it the color of the fonts? Are you doing bold versus italic? Are you doing regular versus underline? These are all of the options that you have when you design, and you need to pick carefully so that you are highlighting the things that you want to be most prominent and then downplaying the things that are smaller details that don't matter. The next thing is repetition. So this gets me all of the time because people get carried away with contrast and then they forget about repetition. So they want to have 17 fonts, a million colors, 63 sizes, and there's no consistency in the page. So repetition is very important because it tells you how things relate to each other, right? It kind of like sets the theme for your design. So for example, in this resume, you see that all of the headings are the same size and the same font. You also see that everything is aligned to the left side. This brings order to the page. This brings consistency to the design so that it doesn't look like it's all over the place. It's clean, it's easy to read, it's easy to navigate, and I can easily scan the page and decide where I want to look and what I'm trying to read. You have to choose, I wouldn't say necessarily like stick to a theme, but you have to kind of choose a certain setting for your design. So, for example, for me, a lot of times I use a script font in my title. So whether it's a title of an event, the title of a webinar, the title of a blog post, a heading, I always try to use one of the script fonts in the title to add a little bit of repetition from my logo to that. I also make sure that I use, like bolds and italics. So I'll make all of the supporting text, I'll make it a specific kind of font, and I'll make sure that that font repeats throughout the whole entire design. And you'll see what I'm talking about in a few minutes when we switch over into Canva. But don't be so caught up in contrast that you don't that you don't also add repetition. The next thing is alignment. So where things are aligned, also tell people what is important and create a connection with other things on the page. So for example, you'll see on this side, all of the blue text are places where the person has worked and the year. These are all the same kind of text, right? They all talk about time, location, and the place of work. So you can see that they're all aligned to the right to show that this is a group. Same thing with the experience on the other side that's aligned to the left. This is all the same kind of text. It's all a group, so that's why it's grouped together. So the way that you align things on a page also helps to tell the viewer what goes together, what should be considered a group or a category of things, and what is standing on its own. Afraid to use alignments and spacing to also lay out your page. Here, they could have done the most and they could have put a line, or they could have done the most, and made it all left aligned. But instead, they just let the space speak for itself and create its own individual line. So with alignment, less is more. You don't always have to add, actual lines and, create boxes around stuff and, add borders and all this. You can actually create lines and create boxes very visually with the way that you align your text. The next thing is proximity. So we have contrast, repetition, alignment, and now we get to the P in crop, which is proximity. How closely things are together represents what goes with one another. So, for example, if you have a flyer and the title and the address all go together, you're going to confuse the reader or the viewer. Why? Because the eye is thinking this is a group, this is all one thing, and I'm going to move on to the next thing. So they might completely miss the address because they think that it's just part of the title, right? So think about here. You see the name, right? But right underneath Kevin's last name is his address, very small. Because it's grouped together, you might have totally missed this because you just saw his name, saw how big it was, saw that it had hierarchy, and then your eye continued down the page and you might have missed this little thing. So adding some space and separation will call this out so that people can spot it easier. Hold on. Okay. Well, I was gonna have to take the L on this. I just noticed I didn't make this private, so there are people watching, who might not be supposed to be watching. So whatever, just gotta take the L on this one. Moving right along. So back to proximity. So you'll see here the way that they broke down the page is based on proximity, how closely they place these together. So since these are formations, They're all close together and separate from the following group, right? It's easy to notice. So how closely you place things together is how closely related that they are. If they're all the same thing, or they all are sharing the same kind of information, like address, date, and time, then you should put them close together because they're all the same kind of thing. But don't put everything in one big paragraph, like, you know, putting a whole quote together and your website and your handles and the date and your logo all in one without bringing any separation to the design. So I have just some examples of other designs that kind of showcase the principles. So here you'll see that they pair the logo with the tagline closely together, right? They are making it sort of like a little mini word mark in a sense. You'll see on the other side of the business card that they've aligned everything to the right, but you'll see that they created some contrast by making the top line green and adding some space so that way they're grouped separately so you know that they're two separate things. There are so many things that you have to take into consideration when you design, but the crop method is a good one because you can easily see if you've added contrast, if you've included repetition for some consistency, if you've aligned things in a way that makes sense, and if you've also grouped things with the proximity to show people that they go together. So now let's move over into Canva so you can see these at work. All right, so the first thing that you want to do when you're in Canva is go to where it says your brand and add your brand colors. You need to be consistent with your brand colors, as we all probably know. Your brand should have a color palette. You should have at least 2 to 3 fonts that you constantly use. So like you'll see on this side, you should have a heading font, you should have a subheading font, and then a body text font. And this is important, again, for that contrast factor. You want to be able to add emphasis on certain things, and you don't always need to make things bold to add emphasis. You can, like I said, change the font, you can change the color, you can change the sizing. So having a couple of font combinations is great for your brand. You can easily go on Pinterest and Google font combinations. I actually have some on my Pinterest board saved so that you can see what fonts go best together. More importantly, plugging in your brand colors. So you need to know the color code for your colors in order to add them to your brand colors. So you can just easily search color converter online, and you can place the RGB, which stands for red, green, blue codes, and then you can get the HTML equivalent of that color. And then you add them in here. Why? Because again, you want to create patterns and consistency with your designs. You cannot have, a black and gold design today, a lime green and yellow design tomorrow, a blue and white design the next day. If you want to create some consistency around your brand, you should have 3 to 4 colors. 4 is pushing it, but 3 to 4 colors that you always constantly use throughout your designs. This is not saying that these are the only 3 colors that you'll ever use, but for the most part, these are the colors that you should stick to so that people start to recognize your stuff. When you see my designs, you know that I designed it. Why? Because I use the same fonts and the same colors, and you want to make your brand recognizable. So I use these 3 colors and black and white in most of my designs, whether that's my book, whether it's my website, or anything that I put on social media. So after you have all of these set up, it'll make your life a lot easier. I don't pay for Canva at work, so you'll see when I hover it says upgrade. Ain't nobody got time for that. So I just have my fonts memorized. So I use a font called Cheddar Jack, and I use a font called Lato or Lato, Lato. And that's, again, all over my site and the fonts that I use when I design. So let's jump right in. So this is just a simple little Instagram flyer that I created for one of my websites called Snatch While Hustling, which is basically an online community for entrepreneurs who also want to be healthy and fit while they run their business. So you'll see that Snatch While Hustling is a title. So it's all grouped together. It's very, very close in proximity. I've added some contrast because I want people to focus on the hustling part, on the fact that this is for entrepreneurs, people who are working. So I changed the color, and I also added contrast by changing the text to be script. You very well could have had this be regular kind of font, right? So I could have definitely had it been Roboto, but it looks trash, right? I could have made it caps, but it's not really giving me much. So you have to keep playing with things until you find something that works, right? You have to capitalize. You have to make things lowercase. You have to make them sentence case. You have to make them bold. You have to try multiple fonts. You have to keep trying different combinations until you see something that works for you. So for example, Snatched and While, they're both caps. Why do I make them uppercase? Because I feel like lowercase looks whack. Just my personal preference. So most of my titles are always capitalized, some sort of sans serif font, and sans serif means that they don't have the little like design like lines at the end. So I'll show you. So this one's perfect. So you see how at the end of the D and at the end of the E, it has like those little extra markings. That's what's called a serif font. It has those little endings. They're not necessarily flat. So when you look at Snatch compared to While, it's different because While is sans serif and doesn't have those little markings at the end, and Snatched does. I usually recommend combining a sans serif and a serif, but you cannot have all three. You cannot have a sans serif font, a serif font, and a script. No. I'm like the lady from Get Out. No. You want to have one or the other. You either have a serif font with a little whatchamacallit, or you have a script, but you can't have both. Sans serif works pretty well, especially if you are the type of person who wants a simpler, more minimalist brand. Then you can definitely go from there. For this specific design, I used Roboto just because I like that it's condensed and it's tighter. So when we think about spacing, right, when we think about proximity isn't only in words or in sentences, it's also in letters. So I'll give you an example. Canva plays too many games. So when you write something in Canva, a lot of times it looks like this. It's all spread out, it's busted wide open, and it looks horrible. So 9 times out of 10, I always go in here to spacing, and I always decrease the letter spacing so that the letters are closer together and look more compact and complete. Same thing with line spacing. So sometimes, you'll see something in Canva and you type something and it's all the letters are spread out like this. Again, that looks crazy. So either you want to add the text in different boxes so you can move them closer together like this, or you can go to spacing and then just go to line height, which isn't necessarily cooperating right now. I will say this for Canva, you definitely need to have patience because it'd be janky. So you would go to line height and then make it smaller so that these lines become closer together and they aren't all spaced out and wide. You also want to pay attention to these purple grid lines that show up. What it's helping you do is it's helping you align your words or graphics to the size of the page. So that way you can make sure that you have everything aligns either in the center or on the side and the right spacing, and that you aren't, missing any small little details. So I always like to pay attention to that. So now let's go to this flyer, right? To keep it consistent, I kept the same fonts, the same style, but look at what I did. I kept all of the text in the flyer the same. Why? Because in my opinion, it was just as important, right? I was promoting it on the same day. So probably like Friday at like 9 o'clock was when I put the flyer out. I was promoting it on the same day, so I didn't want the date and the time to get lost in the shuffle. And I also didn't want the fact that Ronnie was going to be on the webinar to be lost in the shuffle either. So it's all exactly the same. But had it been, let's say a week or something from now, I probably would have taken this. I maybe wouldn't have made it bold because of the subtitle. So I probably would have unbolded it. And I probably only would have left the date and time bold so that people would automatically have their eyes drawn to the date. The way that I group them also is purposeful, right? I made this its own line by itself so that it stood out. And then I grouped the description, Q&A with Ronnie Brown, serial entrepreneur and seven-figure brand ambassador, because this is all the same thing. Again, this was all types of spaced out like this. And it takes up, one, way too much space, and two, it's hideous. So again, I always go in and change the line spacing to be something that is a little bit more compact, but also allows you to be able to read the sentence, right? Then look at the alignment. So the date and the description are lines to the left, but the subtitle and the title, I made it center. Why? Because these two things go together, and these two things go together. So the alignment and the spacing helps to helps like the reader understand, or helps them navigate the flyer. And I keep it real simple. I don't be doing too much of my designs. See? So again, here, make yourself marketable. The tour is all grouped together, right? The tour isn't as important as the make yourself marketable part. That's why it's smaller. That's why it's not bold. And that's why it's basically like almost not even really visible. When it was, where it was, and the time that it was is important. So that's why it's bolder, it's blacker than the make yourself is. And it also is standing front and center with the yellow to make it pop. Like I said before, you don't always have to use your exact brand colors every single time. I used the yellow because I needed to make it pop on my Instagram. I needed people to see that it was coming. And I knew that it wasn't something that was going to live on my Instagram forever. Now that the event is over, it's deleted off my page, so it doesn't mess up the aesthetics of my page or my brand. So it's okay to play around with things that are not going to be permanent parts of your brand if you need to get attention. And the reason I picked yellow was because the A in Atlanta is this little orange color. So I figured it would go well and it would pair well. So let's look at some other ones. So here, we see the contrast in the different kinds of fonts that were used, the different colors. So Lana's second birthday is in a gold box versus everything else is just white. So that's a form of contrast. T for 2 is a scripted font versus everything else is just a regular sans serif font. That's another form of contrast. You can also see the contrast between the teapot and the background. So although both of them are a teal color, one is brighter than the other to make the tea kettle pop. Again, another form of contrast. Now we see repetition. August 29th, 2019, while they're planning really early for the second birthday party, like the girl is not even born, so good for them. It's 4 in the afternoon at the Baxter residence. These are all of the details for the party. And as you can see, they repeated the same font, the same size, the same color. They grouped it all together so the proximity is close so that you know that these lines go together. They're the same kind of information. And it's aligned in the center along with the rest of the items on the flyer. So let's go and do another one. I don't know why they still got Christmas stuff over here. Okay, so this sale flyer, you're going to be creating email campaigns. You're going to be sending out email marketing. You're going to post coupons and promotions on your social media. So sales flyers are going to be important. Here, what do we notice? We notice that all of the words contrast very well with the white, off-white color and the light pink color they have going on, right? So the circles immediately fall to the backdrop while not being invisible. So while you can acknowledge and your eyes can clearly see that there are those peachy pinkish circles in the back, your eyes are still immediately drawn to the darkest, boldest thing on the page, which is up to 50% off sales items. Why? It's bold, it's a dark color that pops up off the page, and it's underlined, right? You can see that the little box that says pop sale, although pop sale is bold and it's the same font as the rest of the text, it's smaller. So you don't automatically go to read that. You are naturally drawn to the 50% off, right? As you can see, the off, OFF, that's also capitalized. Why? Because the designer wants to emphasize the 50% off. They have some repetition by adding the lines underneath each line of the sentence. It's grouped together in proximity because it is one sentence that they want you to read together. So if up to and 50% off were two different things, the designer would drag this down more to show that there are 3 different things, or to show that there are 2 different things. So 50% off sales items would be one group, and up to would be another group. So simply moving things and the way that you place them is going to tell your eye what goes together and what doesn't. And again, as you can see, as I move it, you can see the grid lines popping up to make sure that I align things together how they need to be aligned. So Canva has a lot of great features. I'm not saying that, it's Photoshop or that it's InDesign, but it's definitely something that you can work within if you keep the CRAP principles in mind. So remember, it's about adding contrast, having some form of repetition, the way that you align, and where you position things, right? The proximity of things. Another thing you want to keep in mind, again, is the font. So are you using a sans serif font? You can see here, they have a sans serif font, but the Shop Now, which is something that they do want to add a little bit of hierarchy to, is in a serif font. Why? They want it to pop a little bit. They want to show that it's different from this, and this is probably going to be a clickable link on a site somewhere. So that's how they make it contrast. That's how it shows this is something that you should click on versus pop sale. Like, that pop sale isn't something you're going to click on, but you do know inherently that Shop Now is something that you're going to click on because it looks like if it's italicized, right? So decisions like that need to be made when you design every single day. Anything that you create needs to be intentional and not just, I'm just going to place it here because I think that's where it should go. Okay? After you have decided on what your brand colors are, your font combinations, remember that Canva, again, always wants things to be all spread out for reasons unknown. So you want to make sure that you always play with the letter spacing and the line spacing, as well as the case of the letters. So whether it's, sentence case or capitalized, uppercase, lowercase, whatever, you want to play with different things to see how they look. So this is all uppercase, while this is sentence case. Right? A sentence case is like a regular sentence when only the first word is capitalized. However, they wanted 50% off to pop, so that's why they made the off capital and then they left the rest of the sentence lowercase. So again, these are all things that you have to constantly think about every single day. I'm gonna drop the little PDF that I went over in the beginning of the video into the Google Drive that we have for the group, so you guys can access that there. And there's also just a little one sheet that you can use as well to remind you of the principles. But that's it. Canva doesn't have any, secrets to it. It's just more so knowing about design. So as long as you have the design principles down, you can design on Canva, on Pixlr, on Photoshop, on InDesign, in Paint, on Microsoft Word, on a notepad, wherever, but you just need to have these design principles in place. So don't focus so much on the software that you use, but more so what are you doing with the software. Okay. And then think about what you want your design style to be. Are you trying to be more simple and minimalistic? Are you trying to do the most, right? Like I would never have something like this February 10th thing on my site because this background is doing way too much. I also don't put any pictures of people on my website because stock image is hard to find. Stock imagery with people is hard to find, people of color. So these are all, again, deliberate decisions that you need to make around your brand if you want it to be consistent and look polished. I also just create files for, so even though it's called Snatch While Hustling, in Snatch While Hustling, I create all of the flyers and graphics that I'm going to post on Instagram for the most part. Then I have another Canva file that is specifically for Facebook posts. Then I have another Canva file that's specifically for Twitter posts. I have another Canva file where I do sometimes like 8.5 by 11 page size designs. So I always kind of like to categorize it by where it's going instead of having my Canva be full of a million different files. I just like to add pages to one file. And don't be afraid to use the elements. There are a ton of elements here. A lot of them are free. So, using the frames to drop pictures into them, which I'm sure you already know how to do. Making sure that instead of being there struggling with trying to import things, using right here where it says free photos, right? So that you don't get sued for using somebody's copyrighted image. If you're going to add a line, they have lines. I mean, Canva has everything that you ever needed in life to do a good design. It's just about making the right decisions around your design and placing things where they're going to be most visually appealing. So I hope this was helpful. I'll be on as usual at 9:30 to go over this with you guys, to make sure, I answered any of your questions, or if you have, any design that you are working on that you want my opinion on, definitely have that on deck and pulled up so we can go over it during the Q&A. So I will holla at you guys later. Be great and have a lovely Tuesday. Bye, y'all.